Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Ah, yes, I'm admitting all. Okay, sorry for late. There was hello. Sorry for late. Now I have admitted all. Okay. Can you
The
hear me?
two voices are coming.
तर इको येतोय तुमचा.
बर मी बंद करतो. काहीतरी घोटाळा झाला.
ऑडिओ ऑफ करो. अपना
आता येत नाहीये सर.
हा.
म्यूट करो.
ओके.
Now it's okay.
Ma'am, sir, may I start now?
Yes, yes. Whether Dr. Samir has joined?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, Swati ma'am, you can proceed. And you have circulated YouTube now. You start your recording on YouTube. 1 minute, 1 minute. 1 minute only. I will start recording. I think recording is started. Okay. I will check the recording. Recording is started. You can start now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Deshmukh sir, President MSI India, Dr. Shilpa Jani ma'am,
Hello.
President MSI Gujarat and Goa State,
Bar.
Dr. Vijay Kumar, Regional Coordinator, Saurashtra and Kutch region, dear participants, academicians, research scholars, students, all of you from across the country and the other countries as well. A very good afternoon to all of you in this expert session series. Also, on behalf of one of all present here in the virtual meet, I would like to take my privilege to welcome our eminent speaker, Dr. Samir Damre. He is a principal scientist and head Analytical Service Division, CSIR, National Institute of Oceanology. Now, I invite and request our motivation source, Dr. A.M. Deshmukh sir, to please introduce about MSI to our today's participants and motivate them. So please. Deshmukh sir.
Yes. Sorry. So I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Samir. And I will not talk much, but I'm proud of Dr. Samir. The reason is that he has worked a lot, not for only his institute, but for India and for microbiology. So the work which he has done, he will explain it today. But according to me, the work he has done is a landmark in the history of microbiology of India. So I wish all the best, Swati, to you and to him and to this program. And Shilpa Jani, madam might be there here.
Yes. Yes,
So,
sir, I am here.
okay. Yeah, over to Swati again.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving an insight about MSI to our audience. And I now request Dr. Shilpa Jani ma'am, President MSI Gujarat chapter, to please share her thoughts without all budding scientists. Over to you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Swati. Yes, now 2 voices are coming. Hello. 2 voices are coming.
Ma'am, not from this side.
So there must be more than one meeting started over here. I think so.
Hello, Professor Deshmukh, sir.
Hello, sir.
हाँ सर नमस्कार डॉक्टर सोनवणे हिअर फ्रॉम कोल्हापूर शिवाजी युनिव्हर्सिटी
Yes.
तर मला वाटतं जो इको जो येतोय तो बहुतेक तुम्ही 2 ठिकाणाहून लॉग इन आहात त्यामुळे इको येतोय हा यू हॅव जॉईन फ्रॉम
बर.
2 बिकॉज ऑफ दॅट रिझन दॅट इको इज कमिंग
Okay. I will check. I will
Yes.
close one of the.
Okay.
1 minute. Hello.
Hello, Samir sir. How are you?
Yeah, good afternoon, Sanane sir. Fine.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice here.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have closed one. Okay, you can proceed now.
Right.
Shilpa ma'am, please.
Yes, just a minute. I cannot.
We can hear you, Shilpa ma'am.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, then it's okay. Thank you, all of you. Honorable Dr. Deshmukh sir, Honorable Dr. Samir Damor sir, Dr. Vijay Kumar, Dr. Swati, and with my pleasure, I want to tell you here there are more than 650 participants from India and all over the globe. Good afternoon, all. On behalf of MSI Gujarat chapter, I, Shilpa Jani, welcome you all in this Sunday lecture series organized by RK University Rajkot and MSI. And it is going to be much interesting for all of you, all of us. I hereby congratulate Dr. Swati Goswami, Dr. Vijay Kumar, and whole young and enthusiastic team of microbiology department of RK University for arranging this kind of lecture series for the benefit of our students, researchers, and faculties. I request all participants to get maximum benefit out of this series and wish all the success to the lecture series organizers. Thank you, all of you.
और इस मौके पे चौका कैसे होगा तो मुझे किसी और के बाद बोलने का मौका दिया तो जिन्होंने इतनी मुबारक बातें दी तो उनको भी
Thank you, ma'am, for your wishes. So now, without wasting time, I want to introduce our speaker of the day, Dr. Samir Damra. He's the principal scientist and head analytical services division, CSIR, National Institute of Oceanography. His over to his academic records, he did his PhD in marine sciences, MSc from microbiology, BSc is also from microbiology. Coming to his career record, he is a principal scientist in CSIR NIO from June 2017 till date. He is a senior scientist from June 2013 till June 2017. Also served as a scientist, did his postdoc from Germany. He was as a senior research fellow as well as the junior research fellow as well. He has various awards and scholarships and fellowships on his name. He has total of PhDs to 8 PhD students. 3 of them were awarded PhD and 5 are going on. He has publications as well in research papers of 35 research papers, 3 journal papers, total impact factor of more than 96. He has book chapters, total of 3 in his name, conference proceedings 65, and the Google Scholars citation is 789. He has patents in his name as well. So I request sir to please deliver his lecture. Over to you, Samir sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Swati. Just give me a moment. I'll share my screen.
Yes, sir.
It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me see, sir. Deshmukh sir, please.
1 minute, 1 minute. Because you see, the Zoom link has been developed by Dahikar sir, and control is with me. So there's some technical problems are there. I'm on the phone with Dahikar. Within 2 minutes, we'll solve it. Please bear with us. So in the meantime, Jani madam will give us some idea about the Gujarat chapter within 2 minutes.
Ma'am, Jani ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Deshmukh sir, for providing opportunity. Gujarat chapter has started long back, but the office bearers were appointed from last 2 years. And now Gujarat chapter is going to do well for MSI. And in this case, I request all the attendees that check whether there is student unit at your college or not. So we have to establish a student unit at our college and to make our students very much active with this opportunity to be a part of MSI. MSI is launching very different kind of activities, and even you can motivate your students to take part in different activities at your own idea. So what you have to do for making the student unit, that is very clear. It is already given the brochures in the various groups and they are circulated by mails. But again, I want to tell you, please open a student unit. You have to take only 100 rupees per student. And out of this, only 20% should be submitted to MSI India, and whatever you are getting from your students, 80 rupees you are getting, so you can arrange many activities out of this. Plus, if you wish to arrange something more, then you can demand to MSI India head office, and they will provide us vitamin M for conducting various activities. So we can arrange lecture series, we can arrange webinars, we can arrange some small workshops. Even we can do certain social works with the help of our students. In before 2 days, we have a meeting with the coordinators of Gujarat unit and MSI head office, in which we have discussed that we can plan for a student oriented activity, which is very much important for the awareness of COVID vaccination program, and that we are going to plan in few days, and will circulate among all of us. Yes, any more time is there?
No, no, over. Yes,
Over. Thank you,
Yes,
sir. Thank you,
yes,
sir.
yes. Take
It's
care.
all.
correct. Now, Dahikar sir is is in charge and he will look after. 1 minute.
Yes, sir. We can proceed now.
Yeah, I'll just try to share my screen again. Thank you. No, I am still getting the same sign as host disabled participant screen sharing.
Hello, Swati ma'am. We can start now, please. Swati ma'am, we can proceed.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, please share. Samir, sir, please share the slides.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that, but the same message is coming, host.
Just a minute, sir. Samir, sir, I will make you host. I will make you co-host.
Yeah,
Samir, sir.
okay.
Yeah, just. Yeah, now you are co-host.
Yeah, okay. Now it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slides are visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. All the teachers and students who have taken time out on a Sunday afternoon to listen to my talk here. So I'll try to not bore you people for a long time. And thank you, Dr. Swati Goswami, for giving me this opportunity to present the work which we have been doing at our institute with regards to one of the least studied environment, I would say deep sea. So when you say deep sea, we really don't have much idea about deep sea. You have a lot of trips on the like moon expeditions are there, the satellite launch is there, but still there are very, very few people who are actually studying what is there in the deep sea, which is like covering 70% of our earth. So here today, I'll just give a glimpse of what all we have been doing in our institute, like my group, my PhD supervisors group, and some other people also in the institute. So this will be a collective data which I'll be showing here. It's not only my work, but what we have been doing for past 30 years in a few of the projects which are dealing with deep sea. So before I proceed, I will just tell you briefly about our institute and the organization. So NIO belongs to CSIR, which is one of the largest research body in our country, which is having 37 laboratories and more than 50 field stations. They are spread throughout the India, and we are here somewhere located, NIO. This is the place where I'm sitting at present and giving you my talk. So that's our headquarters at Goa, Dona Paula. Then we have regional centers, two on the west coast. That's one in Bombay and one in Cochin. And then we have one regional center at Vishakhapatnam. So when you talk about oceanography, one of the most important thing is you need to have access to the sea. We are lucky and blessed to have two research vessels with us. One is a coastal research vessel called Sindhu Sankalp, which is on 56 meters. And then we got a new one in 2012 that is called our research vessel Sindhu Sadhana. That's 80 meters, and that's the one which is capable of going to the deep seas. I'll come back to that later. So when you talk about deep sea or the marines, what are the marine ecosystems? So they are mostly of the oceans and seas. And then you have mangroves, which is one of the most diverse habitat. And Goa is blessed to have a lot of mangrove cover along its coast. Now, as we have been studying since the school days, that oceans cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface. Mainly divided into four big oceans. The biggest, the Pacific, then Atlantic, Indian Ocean, the closest to us, Arctic. And I don't know, a few people must have seen recently that the Southern Ocean is also going to be given a status of ocean. The part from 40 degrees south to around the polar region might be called as a Southern Ocean in future. So this marine diversity, yeah, sorry, there were some notifications were coming in between. Yeah, so this marine environment, it's divided into different zones. Now these are basically based on the light capacities. The topmost layer is called the euphotic zone, where all the photosynthetic activities are going on. And that's the place where you find all kinds of phytoplankton, zooplankton, and even the fisheries. Like the most of the time, the Indian fisheries, what fishermen do in India is they do fishing in the euphotic zone, which is a very diverse because it's having good supply of food material. And that is where you have the coast, you have the high tide, low tide, and the intertidal regions, then the estuaries. So this is all part of the euphotic zone, and that's approximately around 200 meters. Now that depends on the clarity of the water and what is the light penetration. Beyond the euphotic zone, you have the bathyal zone. So that's the area where the continental slope is there. So you have this continental shelf. Now these are difficult terminologies. I will not go into details of that, but basically continental shelf is the extension of the land into the sea or the oceans. So that is called as a continental shelf. Then beyond that, it starts dropping, the depth increases. So it gives a slope kind of thing here. That is called as a continental slope, and that is the bathyal zone. And then beyond that is the abyssal zone, which is also called as a dark zone, where you do not have much activity, or a dead zone. Now these are the classical definitions. I do not agree to that Z zone, and I hope by you people also, when I finish my talk, will not call abyssal zone as a dead zone, because that is the one which we have been studying. Coming to the marine diversity, now there are different types of organisms which are found there. You have a lot of viruses being reported. You have bacteria, you have fungi, you have cyanobacteria. Then you have unicellular organisms, that's the corals. Then you have algae, you have mussels, you have bryozoans, barnacles, jellyfish, a huge number of sponges, which are a good source of all the metabolites, and a lot of people are working on them. These are just some beautiful pictures of sponges for you. Then you have sea anemones. Now most of these organisms, what you see, the beautiful creatures, are the ones which are found in the euphotic zone and in the shallow waters. So where you have good amount of light penetration and food present. So what are these marine ecosystems, how they are helpful to us? Some of the benefits which are delivered by marine ecosystems are, they deliver huge amounts of food products. The food products could be in the shape of the fishes, like fishery is one of the major source of income, as well as it's a major source of food and proteins, and a lot of people are into it. and sustainable sources of energy. Then oceans are also responsible for climate regulation and buffer a large amount of CO2 which is released by man. So most of the CO2 which escapes is captured by the oceans in the form of the carbon sequestration, and that is where a lot of people are working upon the ocean carbon pump and how the carbon cycling is going on and how CO2 sequestration occurs. And but then that is the one which is causing the global warming also. I'll come to that in the later parts of my talk. And it is known for maritime activities from ages, like much before the internet era. Seas were used as maritime activities. So the shipping industry was there, and they are helping all kinds of economic developments of job creation. So these are some of the benefits which are delivered by the marine ecosystems. So when you talk about the extreme environments, that's the title of my talk, like, okay, deep sea is an extreme environment. You can think of deserts, that's where you don't have much life. Then the polar regions, because they're extremely cold. Oceans also are considered, and volcanoes because of the high temperature. So basically it's any environment which is not supporting the life easily. That is what we call as an extreme environment in our normal language. So coming to one of the parameters which are playing a major role in making these oceans as extreme environments is the pressure. Like you have a lot of different pressures which we record and see. Like you have a negative pressure in the xylem of the trees. That's because of that the water could flow in the opposite direction. Then in the rooms where we all are sitting, I am talking, you people are listening, that's the atmospheric pressure, that's around 1 bar. Then you have turgor pressure, you have the fish swim bladders, and then you have the deep sea organisms which can tolerate extremely high pressures. So in the marine environments, you have an increase of every 10 meters, the pressure increases by 1 bar or 1 atmosphere. So the Mariana Trench, which is reportedly around 12,000 meters, 11,000 something odd. So it is having a pressure of around 110 megapascals or 1,100 bars or 1,100 atmosphere. That's 1,100 times higher than the rooms what we are sitting in. But in spite of that, you have the life existing there, and people have recorded in terms of the organisms or in terms of the signatures in terms of DNA or the amino acids. So life does exist there even in that extreme conditions. Now, why these deep sea conditions become extreme? One thing I discussed is about the high hydrostatic pressure. Then the second one is the temperature. So as you start going deep down in the oceans, the temperature decreases. And at one point, it becomes very stable and it's around 4 degrees Celsius. So it becomes like a huge refrigerator or a cold room where you have very low metabolic activities going on because of the low temperature. Activities do exist, but then as you know that normal biochemically, the temperatures affect the enzyme activities and all the other metabolic reactions. So the activities are going on, but at a very slow speed. And then the another important thing is there is no assured supply of nutrients. So there is a sporadic occurrence of nutrients. So which we call in a classical condition like a feast and famine condition. So what's feast and what's famine is like feast is, suppose in deep sea, you have a fish dying and it starts sinking down as it dies. So when it is sinking, it starts its degradation. And that is called as a feast condition. And once that is completely degraded, then you don't have nutrients. So that's the famine condition. So the organisms which are present in these marine environments in the deeper parts, they have to adapt their metabolism such a way that they should be able to increase the speed of metabolism when they have good amount of food. And again, they should be able to control it when they don't have the proper food supply. So that's the range of the KM activities which the enzymes record from this. So that's one of the fascinating features for all the biotechnological applications where we are looking enzymes with different kinds of properties. Now, when we talk about the marine samples or the marine habitats, what we have to study and sample, we basically do two kinds of samplings. One is the water, which is present throughout, And the second is the sediment or the soil which is present on the sea floor. So that could vary from 3000 meters to whatever depth you are able to sample. So I'll just briefly tell you about the different kinds of sampling gears or sampling units what we use. Now what you see here, this is called as a CTD rosette. Now CTD stands for conductivity, temperature and depth. This is a classical name for the CTD, but then now with the increasing number of probes which are being attached, like you have a chlorophyll probe, you have a pH probe, and different kinds of probes are being developed and attached. So this gives a real-time data when we are lowering it into the water. When I talk to anybody, the first question they ask me is like, okay, 5000 meters, when you go for sampling, do you go down yourself? No, that's not possible. Human beings cannot go that because of the pressure what is being, if we try to go in there, our body will collapse and we will die. So that's not really not possible. And not every country is having manned submersibles where you can really go at this depths. Even the nuclear submarines, what the Navy has, that also goes max up to 1500 or 2000 meters. So we are doing sampling much beyond that at around 5000 meters. So I will show you some pictures of that later on. So when you talk about the water samplers, these are the water samplers which are used throughout the world. Any oceanographic studies you go, you will find them collecting the water sample using this. So this is called as a Niskin sampler or Niskin bottle in the name of the scientist who discovered it, Professor Niskin. So what these bottles are attached to this rosette, what we call, and they are open when they go down. And when they reach a particular depth, suppose you want to collect a water at around 5000 meters, you have a unit in the ship which you can trigger. And these, what you see here, these ends, they close, and then the water of that particular depth gets trapped inside. This is leak proof, seal quite well, it seals. So there is no way of water mixing. And then we retrieve this back onto the ship and then do the collection and then proceed to study the organisms or the chemistry of that water. So this is regarding the water sampling. Now water sampling is that way much easier because you have huge amount of water which is present, and it doesn't matter like, okay, even, but then when you talk about the sediment that is at the sea floor, which you really need to collect in a different way. So there are different samplers available for that, and people are still developing. The most commonly what we use in our expeditions is called as a spade corer or a Usnel box corer, what you see here on the upper side of the screen. So this is called as a spade corer because it's you have a box which is attached, which goes down open, and when it hits the sea bottom, it closes, and that is how the sediment which is there on the bottom, sea bottom, it gets trapped into the box and then it comes up. Now people have come out with this. Then there are problems with this is that you always have a question like, what is a guarantee that the water has not come in contact with the sediment when you are coming it? Like 5000 meters, it takes around 3 hours for the box to come up, and there are all the chances that water will come in contact with the sediment, and that's what we call in common microbiology as contaminant. So you might have organisms which are present in the upper water layers entering into the sediment which you have collected in the bottom water, from the bottom depths. So we have come up with another instrument which is a sealed tube kind of thing here, if you see, which goes and penetrates into the bottom, and then you get a sediment which is trapped, and this is sealed again like those bottles. So there is no question of any contamination entering into the sediment, and that's how we get the virgin sediments from the deeper parts and the deep sea areas. That is if you are interested in studying the top surface, say 50 to 60 centimeters. That is where you have all the microbial activity going on. But then what if you are interested in studying much deeper than that? So you have something called as this. You have seen this borewell, how they do on land where for the water connections. So similarly, you have something called as a drilling. Here you can see exactly the works on the principle of the borewells, what we do on land. So you have a small drill bit which goes on drilling into the core of the earth, and then you have the sediment which is entering inside. It's a very complex mechanism. It's not very easy. So not many people have the capabilities. Like on our ship also, we are able to take out samples or the cores up to 20 meters long. So we don't have a facility where you can get samples beyond the 20 meters. But then there is a body called as, there is a program called as IODP, International Ocean Drilling Program, wherein they have collected cores up to 2000 meters. That's 2 kilometers down into the ocean. And that is where they are studying, and they have found signatures of life even at 1882 meters. That's around 1.7 kilometers way down, which they are saying is will give us clue about the how the life originated. And now this is not in terms of the live organisms, but this is in terms of the DNA and some of the amino acids which they have found from that depth. So that's about the deeper crawling if you want to do into the deep parts of the ocean. But it's not easy because of the pressure which is there at that bottom. Because when the land, if you are doing, you just need to take care of the hardness of the soil or the rock. But here, along with that, you also need to look into the pressure and how your drill is going to work. So it's very complicated. Not many people are capable of doing this sampling. And then beyond that, if really somebody is more interested, then you have something called as a manned submersibles, wherein a few people can go, 4 to 6 people. Now this is the Shinkai 6500 from Jamstec, Japan. Only 3 countries are having at present manned submersible: Japan, France, and US. India still doesn't have, unfortunately. But at present, in the deep sea mission, which has been sanctioned by the Union Cabinet 15 days back, they are going to develop a remote ROV, remote operated unmanned submersible, which will be going up to the depths of 6,000 meters. I hope it happens, and we all will be able to make use of that. So this is how the submersible works. Now this, the deepest manned submersible, which is at present in operation, is owned by Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which is Alvin 2 it's called, and it goes up to the depth of around 7,000 meters. Beyond that is all unmanned, like Mariana Trench. James Cameron, the guy who made this Titanic movie. So he has invested a lot of money and done 2 dives in Mariana Trench at 11,800 meters, where he has done a beautiful photography. If you can Google and check on YouTube, you will have the James Cameron movies, which is shot at Mariana Trench, where he has reported the diversity from there and how the ocean bed is really there. Now, when these are all the difficulties in sampling and the environment, but then in spite of that, there are inhabitants in the deep sea environments, and that is in the form of the microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses, archaea, chytids, etc. We find a lot of small invertebrates there in the form of the like nematodes and other organisms. And this diversity is well represented across different taxa. It is no longer considered as a dead zone as long as life is considered, and it is really huge number of diversity is present in this deeper parts of the area. But then how do these deep sea inhabitants face the extremities and survive? So this is what we started in our lab somewhere, like my PhD supervisor in 1991, she started looking into it, which I continued. Like I joined NIO in 2001, and since then I've been working in this area. It's almost 20 years now. So how do these deep sea inhabitants face? So we took example, the most easily cultivable like bacteria and fungi, and started looking into them. Now these adaptations in the deep sea organisms could be in the form of morphological, or it could be physiological adaptations. Physiological adaptations, we are looked into membrane composition, or organic osmolyte production, or the stress proteins which are produced in the to counter the stress in the form of the pressure or the temperature or the nutrients. Like microorganisms, we will not consider the light part because they are really not dependent on the light. That's mostly the planktonic, the chlorophyll producers who need light. These are some of the pictures of abnormal morphological features which we have observed from the fungi which were collected from the deep sea, deeper parts. Now, these are all were part 20 years back sampling what I had done during my doctoral work. From 5,600 meters, the sediments were collected. And you can see this is an example of a normal aspergillus, which we have seen since our school days. Like this is how a normal aspergillus looks with a phyllid and the conidiospores and then the conidiophore. But then these are the different variations what we see from the organisms which have been collected from the deeper parts. Like if you see this example, this is a very classical example where instead of having the conidiospores developing, you have another conidiophore developing, and then it again produces phyllets, and that is how the propagation occurs. Then you have different kinds of adaptations while they are growing also. This is how a normal growth looks like, and this is how the stress looks like. These are again some of the known variations, like yeast are known to elongate under stress. Now this is not only like, but here we have subjected them to a low temperature and high hydrostatic pressure. Yeast are known to do this in different kind of stresses. Then we have recorded microconidiation also, like instead of the elongation of the conidiophore, you immediately find next conidiation, because you need to understand that the metabolic activities are really slow and they need to conserve the energy for all kinds of life, the normal activities which a cell can carry upon. So that's the reason they do not waste any energy. Nature really conserves energy, and organisms know how to maximize the use of the energy what they're producing. So microconidiation is one of the example where the conidia are formed immediately instead of the elongation which is normally seen. Then coming to the biochemical adaptations like organic osmolytes. Now, this is one of the universal protein stabilizer which has been recorded in many of the fishes and crustaceans. So this is trimethylamine N oxide, and it increases with depth in the muscles of the many of these eukaryotic organisms, and that is how they are able to survive the pressure which is exerted onto the tissues. Now, there are some of the, like in Indian Ocean, we really don't have any live hydrothermal vent there. But if you go to Pacific and Atlantic, you have a lot of hydrothermal vents which people have reported and studying the diversity from there. And these are known to be as really diverse, the rich habitats where you can record different kinds of communities. And people have been studying this Riftia. These are the tube-like organisms which can grow up to 5 to 6 meters also. And these are having different compounds which people are studying into. It's still not known, but then the sulfur-based solutes like hypotaurin and thiotaurin have been described. And these are known to be produced only under the stressful conditions of the hydrothermal vents and the cold sips. At present in our institute, we have a program running into looking into these cold sips, which have been recently reported in some parts of the northern Indian Ocean, where we have done 3 expeditions and we have found different kinds of clams and a lot of different varieties of crabs have been reported from these vent regions. Apart from that, there are a lot of methylated solutes which have been reported from these deeper living organisms called myoinositol, betaine, sarcosin. One of the problems which organisms face is like the saturation of the membrane fatty acids under the low temperatures which are existing in deep sea. And it becomes a real challenge for the organisms to maintain the membrane fluidity. And if membrane fluidity is not there, you will not have any exchange mechanisms occurring between the external environment and the inner cytoplasmic fluids. So that is where you have the organisms modifying the ratios of the unsaturated fatty acids within the membrane phospholipids. And that's one of the most commonly studied mechanisms in many of the microorganisms, bacteria and yeast. And they have associated with the decrease in the membrane fluidity as the pressure and temperature goes on increasing. So that's one of the counter mechanisms which organisms are developed to undergo the growth in the stressful conditions. Then apart from that, specialized genes are also expressed by these organisms when they are under pressure. I will not go in the details of that, but then a lot of work has been done with regards to the gene expressions. TOXR is one of the most commonly studied in Photobacterium as well as E. coli. And although E. coli is our normal flora of our intestine, but here again, E. coli is also one of the most studied organism in terms of this to study the effects what are happening when it is subjected to pressure. It's because it's really easy to study because of the very short germination time, the generation time of 20 minutes in the laboratory conditions. But in spite of being an E. coli, people have recorded generation times of around 16 hours. So you can imagine other organisms which are having not so less generation times must be having how much of time. So it really won't be possible even to see the colonies on the plates, what we normally are so used to seeing of E. coli and other bacteria. So they had subjected these E. coli cells to different increasing pressures, and they saw that as the pressure increases, the functions of the cells go on disappearing one by one. So the first one is the motility. Then you have the cell division, which stops at around 20 to 50 megapascals. Then the growth also stops with DNA replication. So if DNA replication is not there, you're not going to get any growth and cell division. But then even then the organism survives. But then after one point, translation and transcription also stops. So thereby stopping all the protein mechanism. And then at around 100 bar, that's around 10,000 meters of depth, the viability of the E. coli cells is completely lost. So these are the model organisms which people have used to study the effect of pressure onto the different metabolic activities which are going on. When I was talking about the manned submersible, I was talking about the difficulties in getting the samples from the deep sea. What happens is if you are interested in studying this organisms from deep sea, you need to have a mechanism to sample them and get them at that particular pressure. Otherwise, what will happen is when you collect a organism which is growing and surviving at around say 5,000 meters, so that's around 500 bar of pressure. Moment you get the organism on top at 1 atmosphere, that becomes an alien environment for them. And most of the time they rupture. Like if we are inserted down into the deep sea, the same thing will happen to us or the organisms which are there in the upper region. If they go into the deeper parts, they are not going to survive and they're going to rupture or collapse with the pressure. So exactly reverse happens for the organisms which are collected from the deeper parts. So that is where you need to have a sampler which can retain the pressure under which they are collected, and only in that condition you will be able to collect the samples. Now this is more applicable for the higher organisms which are multicellular. Bacteria or fungi most of the time are capable of tolerating these kind of pressures because of the adaptations, the biochemical adaptations what we saw in the previous slides. Like membrane fluidity is one of the most important, because if membrane fluidity is not there, you're going to have the rupture in the membrane. So people have developed these pressure retaining samplers in which you can collect the sediments or the organisms directly. But for this, mostly you need to have the manned submersibles, which are the deep sea. This is the Alvin, which I was talking about. This is Alvin 1. Then Alvin 2 is of 7,000 meters. And this is the ROV, remote operated vehicle Victor, which has gone up to 1,100 meters, which was used by James Cameron for shooting in the Mariana Trench. Now coming to the work which I have been doing for past 20 years, looking at whether fungi are present in deep sea. Till early 90s, fungi were thought to be absent in the deep sea sediments, and they were really not given any recognition for their presence as well as the role which they might be playing in the deeper parts of the sea. So the first question we started with was asking ourselves, are fungi present in deep sea sediments? These are the different fungi reported from the deep sea sources so far. You have different kinds of organisms like reported from the water as well as from the sediments. So this is the work which we have been doing in our lab, wherein we have reported more than 220 different kinds of fungal isolates from a depth of around, on an average, around 5,000 to 5,000 meters. These are the ones which we have isolated, but we found most of them are either Aspergillus or Penicillium or Cladosporium, most of the sporulating forms. How is it that, like, how do I showed you some pictures where actually they don't form any conidospores. Then how come the organisms which you have retrieved are mostly the sporulating ones and not the non-filamentous? Not that we did not get non-filamentous, non-sporulating fungi, but the majority, like more than 60% of what we reported in our study was from the belonging to the sporulating fungi. I will come to that in the later parts. Apart from the deeper parts, fungi has also been reported from the hydrothermal vents. And now with the sequencing technology increasing further, we are no longer dependent on culturing these organisms, because that is one of the most difficult parts, because you need to know what nutrients they need. Then the pressure you need to maintain, which is not easy. Like the autoclave, what we do is just 1.1 bar of the pressure. So you can imagine to build a pressure of 500 bar or 500 atmosphere, what kind of machinery you will need. So culturing the fungi is really difficult, and now people are turning towards the uncultured diversity, where they are just collecting the meta-DNA or the eDNA, what it is commonly called as, and then they are subjecting it for sequencing, either to sequence the ITS or the 18S region, and that's how they're reporting the presence of the fungi from there. So it's not basically the cultures which they're reporting, they're just detecting the presence of the DNA, and that's how they are correlating with the presence of the fungi from these parts. Now, if they are present, do they really grow? That is a question which we need to ask. Or they are present as an inactive form. Inactive form, it could be a spore, and they're actually not growing. And that is one of the reasons why we must have got in our study most of the sporulating forms, because moment the spores are given good conditions to grow, ideal conditions, the nutrients and the temperature and the incubation conditions, then they start germinating, and that is how they form the vegetative form from the non-vegetative spores which are found embedded in the deep sea sediments. Now, when I talk about this deep sea fungi, it has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because most of the cultures what have been reported so far, either bacteria or fungi, they are not truly piezophilic or the barophilic organisms. They are the barotolerant, means they are able to grow and tolerate both atmospheric pressure and the high pressure. That is the reason we are able to cultivate them in the lab, because what happens is that, again, as I was telling you in the previous slides, this problem in the samplings, when you are bringing the sample from the high pressure to the atmospheric pressure, only the we can get, because the DNA will ultimately be there, and that is how you can report that, say that, okay, these cultures are there. But if you want to study how they are growing, you need to have a culture. That is where your classical microbiology still has a big role to play, in spite of this developments in the molecular biology. You need to have a culture with you to study what the culture is doing and how it is growing. So we have a tool in our lab. This is in my lab, which we can simulate the deep sea conditions up to 1,200 bars. That's for the Mariana Trench. And this is the container in which we put our samples or the cultures to grow. And then you can pressurize it and then detach it and leave it. Like sometimes my incubation times are 3 to 6 months, because as I was telling you, the metabolic activities are extremely slow, and we need to give time to the organisms to adapt to the pressure and to grow and carry on the metabolic activities to double, so that we can study them if the number is more. So this is a high pressure microbial culture vessel which is there in my lab. So with the help of this, we come to know that, okay, fungi are present and they are growing. And so if they are growing, what might be the role this fungi are playing in the deep sea sediments? Like in the nature, no organism just grows for the sake of growing. They have a role defined, and they carry on that without any issues in the environment where they are surviving. So one of the roles which you can assign to this fungi in deep sea is the carbon sequestration by means of aggregation in the sediments, or recycling of nutrients by means of degradation in complex molecules to simpler forms. Fungi are known to produce a lot of extracellular enzymes, and those are the enzymes which could be helping to recycle the complex degradation of complex molecules. If you go to any environment, fungi are the ones like if say lignin degradation. Fungi are the one which initiate the lignin degradation, and then the bacteria take over and carry forward the degradation at much higher speed than what fungi can do. So apart from understanding the mechanism, how this happens, we have also looked into these deep sea organisms as source of novel enzymes. And during the course of this time, we found out that these cultures are producing beautiful enzymes which are capable of tolerating and working in the cold condition. That is how we discovered a cold tolerant protease which could be used in the detergent industries. And that's the patents what we hold in our lab for that. Now, when I was talking about aggregation, like this is a known phenomenon that aggregation, even in the terrestrial environment, it helps in stabilization of sediments, carbon sequestration, formation of humic enzyme complexes so as to facilitate nutrient cycling in the sediments. Like the enzymes which are secreted by the organism, they should not go far away from the organisms, otherwise it is of no use to the organism and the enzyme is waste. So that's how the humic enzyme complexes are formed, and the enzymes stay in close vicinity of the organisms. So these fungi, even in the deep sea sediments, we have seen that they grow and contribute to recycling of the nutrients. And we saw that fungal biomass, it contributes to up to 2.3 to 6.3 micrograms of carbon per gram of dry weight of the sediments. Now this is totally contrast to what was said in the mid up to 90s that fungi are not present, but they are present and they are actively involved in many different reactions which are occurring there, and they contribute a huge amount of biomass in terms of the carbon fixation which is occurring there in the deep sea paths. Now this all we have managed to publish in different journals. But then why they were not reported, like why people are talking so much against like fungi are not present, and why nobody looked into? That's because of, you can see on the left side of your screen, this is how sediment looks like under a microscope. So we also initially first year when we were struggling to find out fungi and whether they are really present or no, and that is where we came up with an idea which we are trying to for something else actually, and we just happened to try it here. And then we saw that fungi were present, but they are embedded, well embedded into this matrix of sediment which is present, and that is how they have been missed by researchers all these years. And that's where we started looking into different kinds of treatments, and we saw that simple EDTA treatment is enough to break this matrix. EDTA is a known chelating agent, and we really saw that the detection percentage doubled from the samples which you collected. Like that is now 5,600 meters. So the same thing, if we talk about say much shallower parts like 2,500 to 3,000 meters, you will find the fungal contribution much high. That is where we need to relook into the fungal contribution in terms of the carbon sequestration and the role they are playing in the carbon fixation. So this is one of the methods which we developed, and it's published and accepted world over now, and people are using it to detect more and more fungi in the sediments. So that's why we say that fungi are present, but they are hidden in the deep sea sediments where they grow and contribute in recycling of the nutrients. Now with all this, we came forth with a theory, because as I was talking about, we have reported a lot of sporulating fungi. So how do these sporulating fungi have ended up in the deep sea paths? So we say that this fungi, the spores are in the mycelial forms, they are blown with the wind, and there are quite good reports which have attributed of many of these deep sea diseases to the dust which is coming from even the deserts and other areas. And then because it's a new environment, in 1992 somewhere, you had the whole of Caribbean sea fans wiped out by one aspergillosis disease. And then the researchers found out and traced the origin of this aspergillus spores to the Saharan desert. And that is where this theory came for, that, okay, this could be the reason. Then you have the terrestrial runoff, wherein along with the sediment, they go and then they start slowly sinking into the deeper parts, and they get embedded into the sediments which are present there. And then slowly they start adapting to the existing alien conditions there, low temperature, high pressure, the low supply of the nutrients. So we put forth the hypothesis that mycelia adapt well and the adapted forms grow, but some remain dormant in the form of spores and remaining die. That is where we started testing this theory in our lab, where we started taking the culture and training them to grow under high pressure. Like along with the cultures, what we collected from deep sea, we also collected some cultures from the shallower parts, say like mangroves, or even from the culture collection, which were nowhere linked to the marine environment, and started training them slowly to grow in the high hydrostatic pressures. And we were successful in getting some terrestrial forms even to grow up to 500 bar. And that is how we could say that if you give a sudden shock, then the organism will not survive. But if you train them slowly to grow, like say you grow them at 10 bar, then again go to 50, 60, and in slow increments, the organisms are capable to grow. We started with around 500 different isolates, and we ended up with 2 isolates which are able to grow at 400 bar, and they were not linked actually to the deep sea, and they were the terrestrial ones which we managed to grow. So that supported our hypothesis well, that okay, if you can adapt them, and that is how is what is happening in the natural environment also, that theory of adaptation. So in all these things, we have so far seen that fungi are present. The questions which we asked ourselves, we were able to answer. Fungi are present in the deep sea sediments. They grow in the deep sea sediments. Then they cause microaggregation in deep sea sediments, which helps in carbon sequestration. And the extracellular enzymes which are produced by fungi help in recycling of nutrients. And apart from that, they could be a very good source of the novel enzymes for the biotechnological applications. We have got good number of papers supporting all these theories from our lab so far. So this was all regarding this, the fungi, the presence of fungi and the role. But then one question remained still unanswered. That is, how do fungi survive and grow on the deep sea sediments, which we really didn't manage to. And then in 2012, we started looking into that. And the aspect what we started looking into is the expression of proteins, because that is one of the most important responses given by a cell in response to the stress it is subjected to. So for this, we have in 2012, we set up a proteomics facility in our institute. When I came back from Germany, this is one thing which I started looking into, and finally the facility was set up in 2012. Took me around 3 years to get it running. And it's 12th next week it will complete 9 years of its existing in my lab. But why people are so interested in studying these deep sea organisms or the extreme environments? Because these are why extremophiles are significant in modern industries, because of the reasons that most of the standard enzymes, they stop working when exposed to the extreme conditions. It could be the temperature, it could be other the conditions which they need to act upon. So by remaining active when other enzymes fail, the enzymes from the extremosyles, or which we can call them extremozymes, can potentially eliminate the need for those added steps. So here I give example of the protease which we have been working and which we have successfully shown that works as a good additive into the detergent industries. In the detergents what we use, like if you really need to go into the cold conditions, the normal enzymes will not work. But then if you have a cold active temperature, or reversely, you have a high temperature active enzyme, you really don't need to spend energy to heat or cool the water. That is where all these extreme enzymes come into picture. This is just one of the examples. There are many more examples. That's the reason why people are very interested looking. So it is not only the basic science, it's the biotechnological applications also. The deep sea environment helps us well. Some of the examples, not from deep sea, just talking about the extremophiles, is Thermus aquaticus, the Taq polymerase, which revolutionized the DNA. Then you have the PFU polymerase, which is having activity up to 110. You have many of the detergent adhesives, textile industries, food industries, and then even bioremediation is help. So that's the exciting part about the research, what we have been carrying out with regards to the deep sea environment. How you could be part of this. That's mainly for the students, student community, which is there. The careers in biology. The biologists really learn how living things work and how they interact with one another and how they evolve. So the work of the biologists, the increases of understanding about the natural world in which we live and help us address issues of personal well-being and also the worldwide concern. If you want to join NIO for doing PhD or as project assistant, check our website www.nio.org. At present, because of this COVID pandemic going on, we have really stopped taking the dissertation students. Otherwise, we have two kinds of dissertations in our institute. We have a 3-month summer training or summer internship, what we call, and then you have a full-fledged dissertation. On an average, we get around more than 100 students every year who get trained in different parts, and we really allow them to use all the instruments which are there in our institute. Second is we have a lot of projects running in our institute where you could join as a project assistant. But if you want to join as a PhD directly, the best thing is you clear your CSIR net or all the PhD qualifying examinations which are being held for the fellowship. And then we have twice a year admissions open for the PhD. So you look for the advertisements, contact the scientist, look at the work, what he or she is doing, and then you can answer the interview and join with your fellowship for the PhD. That's much faster than joining as a project assistant, because once you join as project assistant, you need to spend minimum 2 years. And after that, you're allowed to register if you manage to publish a paper. And then after that is your 5 years of PhD. So that's a bit long. So if you can clear your net exams, that's much faster to do. Apart from that, in non-COVID time, we were allowing a lot of students and universities from different colleges who were coming, and they can see our exhibition section where we have. Apart from that, you can also look at some of the films which we are hosted at our website www.nio.org, which will give you a fair idea of different kinds of work which is going on. NIO is a real multidisciplinary institute where you have, apart from the division where I work, biology, you have physics, you have chemistry, you have geology, you have ocean engineering. Then we have marine instrumentation, who are into developing of different underwater instruments. And we do have our computer section also, wherein they are continuously looking into developing and maintaining the different data, what we the data center, what is being collected by us, and how people can access and make use of it. So for that visit, you can contact the link which is given on the website, and that is how you can come with your colleges. Now coming to the last part, which is really at present a hot topic of discussion, the deep sea as a source of minerals. Many of you must have seen and shared on different social media the deep sea mission of Government of India. That's nothing new actually. That's being carried out under different projects in different institutes. So this time the government has bought all of these projects under one umbrella called as Deep Sea Mission. Initially, it started at a very big budget of 15,000 crores, but due to this COVID pandemic, it's come down to around 4,500 crores now and that is where different activities will be going on. And the main activity where my institute and I will be involved is with regards to the polymetallic deep sea mining, which is not a very far reality. It's really come to the last stage where next year we will be doing a test trial for the deep sea. India is one of the few countries who have reached that level. It's only the US, Russia, France, and then fourth is India, where we have really got permission from the International Seabed Authority to carry out the trials in the area which has been allocated to us. That's somewhere down in the Southern Ocean near it's at around 13 degrees south. So in the Southern Hemisphere beyond the equator. And we have been, these are the polymetallic nodules which are present on the deep sea, which we will be mining. And these are rich in iron, manganese. And India is mainly interested for cobalt, which is there in good amount in this polymetallic nodules, because at present we do not have any cobalt mines on land. And even for a small X-ray, which we need to do, we are still dependent on the cobalt, which is being imported from countries like US, which are rich in the cobalt material. This is the ship which I was talking about, which has been serving us for last 5 years now. And we have done long voyages on this. This is the sampler, what I was talking about for collecting the water. This is the Niskin bottle, and this is a CTD rosette. Then this is called as a multiplankton net, which is used to collect the zooplankton. which are present in the water column. This is the sampler what I was talking about, which collects the sediment from the deeper parts. So these are used mainly for collecting the surface sediments up to 50 centimeters. And then we get to the lab, and these are my PhD students who were there with me for the cruise in which we went recently for the sampling. Apart from that, one major program which I right now I am leading and I'm part of it is the genome mapping of Indian Ocean. And under this program, we had a long cruise, longest cruise in the history of India of 90 days, which we started on 10th of March and we just ended recently. I just came back from the cruise. It's not even a month, on 6th of June from the Indian Ocean, where we started from east coast of India, that's Visakhapatnam, going up to the Andaman Seas at Port Blair, then going down up to the Indonesian coast, and then going down up to 30 degrees south. Then we took a fuel break at Mauritius. We did not touch land, we were in water. And then we came back to Goa on 6th of June. So we have covered almost like 10,000 nautical miles. So that's around approximately 20,000 kilometers in terms of the land travel. And a huge amount of samples have been collected, and this is going to be first of its kind where we will be doing genome mapping along with the transcriptome and proteome mapping to understand who is present and what are they doing in the different areas. So starting from Bay of Bengal to Indian Ocean to Southern Indian Ocean and the Northern Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea. So that will take maybe around a year or so. So this was splashed all over the media, and Doordarshan also streamed a documentary. So if you are interested, you can just Google out Trace Biome documentary by Doordarshan and have a look. So you will have an idea exactly what is done on the cruise and what are the different activities we do. So this is all the team Trace Biome, which was there with me for 90 days on the ship without internet or without social media or without telephone. So you are really cut off, and it's like the best time where you can interact with people, talk to them without phone or computer in your hand. So that is really a sometimes advantage. You can get back to yourself. So with this, I would like to say thank you. And thank you for giving me a chance to showcase our work, what we have been doing, and in future, what we'll be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Samir,
Thank you, sir.
for excellent talk. Hello, can you hear me? Dr.
Yes,
Samir?
yes, sir. I'm here. I was just drinking water.
So, what I want to tell you, this is not the end. This is the beginning today. Because many students are interested to learn many things from you.
Definitely, sir.
So is it possible to arrange any training, workshop or something for the student? We'll think on that.
Yeah, surely, definitely. Let this COVID pandemic end, because we have started a skill center at NIO where we'll be organizing different courses for the students and even for the teachers, the young teachers who are starting their career. So under that, I will keep you posted. But because of this pandemic now, everything has got postponed.
Okay.
So I'll definitely inform you about it.
Yes, and one more thing, Dr. Sonone is there, KD Sonone, sir. He
Yes.
is the head of microbiology department at Shivaji University, Kolhapur.
Yeah, I am in touch with him because I am at present the BOS member of Shivaji University for microbiology.
Very good,
Yeah.
very good. So Sonone, sir, please, if he's or whether he has left, KD Sonone, I think he has left. Hashmi madam is there, Seema Hashmi from Bid, and Vadai sir is from Nagpur. Vadai sir, please comment. Vadai sir. Vijay Vadai. He is a BOS chairman.
Hello, sir. I would like to comment.
Yes.
It was such a brilliant lecture now, sir. I have heard it for the first time. So nice, informative lecture. And it was just like that I am seeing a movie or I was there in the deep sea. I felt like that, sir. I am very much thankful to you, sir. AM, sir. and Samir sir for organizing such a nice topic, sir. I am very much thankful to both of
Please
you, sir.
introduce yourself, ma'am. Please introduce.
Sir, myself, Dr. Seema Hashmi. I am working as a professor, head, and research guide in the subject of microbiology, Milia College, Bid. I have completed 25 years of my service, and that is my introduction, sir. I am very much delighted to hear this lecture, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, okay. Swati, ma'am, there is a question in chat box.
Sir, yes, sir. We have one question is in the chat box. That is, what about microplastic pollution at deep sea? One participant has given.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Himani, that's an excellent question because we have started working with microplastic pollution. And in our recent voyage, the expedition, what we completed in Indian Ocean, we have collected huge number of samples for microplastic from the deeper parts also. And maybe another 6 to 9 months of time, you will see that in terms of some report or publication from our group, wherein we will really know if the plastic pollution has reached there. Yeah, so we will be doing not only directly from the water, but we have also collected some organisms from there. So we will know if any biomagnification is occurring of the microplastics. So that's there on our radar. We are working on it.
Sir, I have also collected few of the questions.
Yeah.
From YouTube.
Yes.
Where we are live.
Yeah.
So the first question is from the participant. From the participant side, is there anyone having the question? Please repeat. Okay, sir, I'm taking Samir sir, I'm taking the question.
Yeah, sure.
Can deep sea fungi are metal tolerant? Do marine fungi have the ability to combat oil spills and microplastics?
Yeah, I showed some slides about these polymetallic nodules, which is really rich in all kinds of minerals which are there, mainly the iron and manganese, the heavy metals. And we have found organisms in association with the nodules and also in the inner parts of the nodule. And we have done the metal tolerance studies in terms of the leaching of the metal, what is occurring, and also the organisms, whether they are able to tolerate high concentration, because that is one of the guidelines of International Seabed Authority, where we need to study the effect of high metal concentration of the organisms which are there in the deep sea. And we found that these organisms are quite capable of tolerating, and in some parts they are able to even accredite and form the I was talking about the complexes. So they form complexes and they capture the metals which are present in the water and thereby helping even the nodule formation. Regarding the oil degradation, as I was telling you, that we are also looking not only about the basic how they survive, we are also looking for the biotechnological applications. So we have a huge collection of these deep sea organisms in our lab, and we are making use of them in the different projects what you're running. Now, one of the projects which I have is from DBT, a network project, wherein we are doing some land field trials in the ONGC sites at Assam and Gujarat. And there we have made use of these organisms which are able to tolerate high concentrations of the polyaromatic hydrocarbons or the petroleum degradation. So yes, they can tolerate and they're able to degrade, and they have a good use in bioremediation. About microplastics, at present, I will not be able to give answer for that because we have just started the research. But then looking at the metabolic, the stress, one of my students has done the PhD on the response of organisms, this deep sea fungi, in terms of the stress proteins, what they have produced. And we have seen and reported some of the stress proteins which could be responsible for this microplastic tolerance and degradation also in the protein profiling, the global protein profiling, what we did. So I definitely feel that we will be having some cultures which should be able to degrade and tolerate these microplastics. I hope that answers.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question is, have you found any pollution problem in sea, deep sea?
Pollution in terms of the normal pollutants, what you see, then no. And that is the reason you can still say it's a virgin environment where you have less supply of nutrients. Moment nutrients start reaching there, that is why what we can say as a pollution. So at present, there is no problem of any kind of pollution, but then microplastic is the one pollution which we are fearing, which is going to come there in the deeper parts also in the coming years, if we don't stop dumping of all the plastics into the oceans. Because what is happening is with the weathering, the plastic is getting degraded and into smaller parts. And there are estimates like in the next 50 years, you might find microplastic as one of the major component of the oceans, competing even with respect to the zooplankton and phytoplankton which are present in the oceans. So that might happen in future.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's really a serious matter of concern.
Yes.
Sir, we are having one query from a participant that you talked about nano chip LCMS.
Yes. Yeah.
They asked that can this facility be used by them if they require, and what will be the cost?
Yeah. 2 years back, Government of India has told all the CSR labs that all the instruments which are available in the laboratory should be accessible to all the students in the colleges and universities. So there is a portal. I will type in the chat box here. You can tell the students. It is called Analytics CSIR, wherein all these instruments are available for the students. They need to register, and for student community, the charges are nominal. You can avail it at the chargeable basis. So it's easily accessible. It's not only for NIO. There are other instruments also. More than 1,500 instruments are available on a common platform. So all the students can make use of it. I am heading the analytics CSR for NIO and looking into mainly the biological parts.
Wow, really great, sir. This will definitely help the students. Thank you so much, sir. And the last question is that is related to the communication between deep sea and microbes. The student has asked about this.
Now you
What is
take
the-
last question, Swati.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Can you just repeat the question? What you said? My communication.
What is the actually communication between the deep sea and the microbes? The relationship they are asking for.
Communication.
How actually microbes communicate in the deep sea?
There is nothing, no difference in the communication as compared to what is there in the normal conditions. It's only the adaptation which we are looking into. So communication will be with response to the chemical sensors which are present and which works in your normal experiments also, like your motility and all. When you people do in microbiology, first year, second year practicals, you have these chemical sensors there. So it's the same. The only thing here, the main difference is in terms of their metabolic activities and the Km values of the enzymes which are present. So that is applicable to all the thermodynamic activities which are occurring. They are at very low scale as compared to the normal conditions in terrestrial. Otherwise, the mechanisms are same. There is no difference in mechanism.
I hope students have covered maximum questions. If still there is remaining, then I'll request sir that that will be solved via email.
Yeah, my email ID I had put at just in my first slide. It's samir@nio.org, samir@nio.org. So anyone can write and get the clarifications. I'll be always there to help over email. That's the easiest way to contact me. Only when I am on a cruise or expedition, I am away from the internet and social media.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful information, and students must have got a lot of information from this. And now I request Dr. Vijay Kumar sir to give vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible to all?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, sir, it was really very, very informative talk, and really it shows that it also is visible from the queries which has been asked by the students. Although there were one or two more queries, but which were not taken up. But definitely, as you have provided your email ID, they are going to shoot you questions, and that shows that how this talk series is going to be informative for all. So I would like to thank you. First of all, thank you for sparing your time. As you told that you had just returned from the expedition, and then Deshmukh sir contacted you. So really, thank you so much for coming up for this talk. And I would also like to thank the MSI for providing this platform where all the academicians, students, researchers have came up and they have got this knowledge. I would also like to thank Dr. Shilpa ma'am and Dr. Swati for organizing this event. And again, last but not the least, I would also like to thank Sir for arranging all these links and managing the IT. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now this is for the